She's obviously too poor to be here. The silver-haired executive's words cut through the cabin as he sneered at her dolphin hoodie. The first-class passengers erupted in whispers and smirks, while Emma quietly turned another page of her novel. These corporate sharks had no idea she didn't just belong in first class. Her husband owned the entire airline they were flying on. What would you do if you were mocked for not looking rich enough in first class? Watch how this simple woman left them all speechless. Emma Sullivan adjusted the plush leather headrest on her first-class seat aboard Pacific Voyager Flight 427 from Boston to Washington, D.C. At 42, her chestnut hair fell in gentle waves around her face, highlighting features that needed no enhancement to reveal their natural elegance. She wore what she always preferred: comfort over pretension. A soft blue hoodie adorned with playful dolphins, comfortable jeans, and simple canvas shoes. A quiet smile crossed her face as she opened her well-worn copy of Jane Eyre, a ritual she performed on every flight. The familiar words of Charlotte Bronte soothed her fear of flying, a secret she kept even from Daniel, her husband of 17 years. Emma had boarded early, avoiding the usual parade of business travelers. Flight attendant Jessica had recognized her with a discreet nod and a softly spoken, "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Sullivan," audible only to Emma. They shared an understanding. Built over years, discretion was valued. Privacy. Jessica, Emma had reminded her with a warm smile when they first met 6 years ago. "Please treat me like any other passenger." The first-class cabin filled with executives in tailored suits and designer clothing, corporate types who traveled the Boston-DC route as routinely as others took the subway. Their conversations floated around Emma, fragments of billion-dollar acquisitions and vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard. "Excuse me?" A deep voice interrupted her reading. "I believe you are in my seat." Emma looked up to see a silver-haired man, perhaps in his early 60s. His suit probably cost more than what an average person earned in 6 weeks, and his watch of Vacheron Constantin gleamed ostentatiously under the cabin lights. "I don't think so," Emma replied softly, reaching into her hoodie pocket for her boarding pass. "14B, that's what I have." The man examined her boarding pass with barely disguised contempt, then checked his own. "My mistake," he said, not sounding apologetic whatsoever. 14 says, "See, I'm beside you." As he settled in, his eyes scanned her attire with undisguised judgment. "Richard Blackwood." He introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. "Blackwood Capital Partners." "Emma," she replied with a polite smile, accepting his handshake. No last name offered, no company affiliation. "First time in first class?" Richard asked, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Emma tilted her head slightly. "No, I fly quite regularly." "Well, it's just that most people dress appropriately for premium cabins," he said, gesturing to her attire. "It's a matter of respect, really." Before Emma could respond, a younger businessman across the aisle chuckled audibly. "Some people just get lucky with upgrades," he said loud enough for Emma to hear. "Airlines practically give away first-class seats these days. Standards are slipping." Emma simply smiled, returning to her book. Her grandmother had taught her the dignity of silence when faced with rudeness. Besides, she had Jane Eyre's latest tribulation to attend to, far more interesting than the limited imaginations of men like Richard Blackwood. As the final passengers boarded, Emma overheard fragments of conversation from the 3 businessmen seated behind her. "Have you seen Pacific Voyager's performance this quarter?" One of them said, "Up 23% when most airlines are struggling. Daniel Sullivan is clearly onto something. When he acquired that failing airline, everyone thought he was making a career-ending mistake. Now look at them, industry leaders in just 6 years." Emma smiled into her book. If only they knew. "What do you do, Emma?" Richard asked, closing his tablet momentarily. His tone suggested a question born more of boredom than genuine interest. "I work in charity," she answered, marking her page. It wasn't a lie. She did oversee the Sullivan Foundation's philanthropic activities, but it wasn't the complete truth either. "Ah," Richard replied, his interest visibly diminishing. "One of those nonprofits, saving the rainforest, helping underprivileged children." "Something like that," Emma said with a smile. "The dolphins are my particular passion." She pointed to her hoodie. The man across the aisle who had introduced himself earlier to Richard as Bradley Thompson of Morgan Stanley leaned in. "Sounds more like a hobby than a career. Some of us work for a living." "Indeed," Richard added, the men sharing a knowing laugh. "Some people contribute to the economy, while others just spend the proceeds." Emma merely nodded, returning to her novel. 17 years of marriage to Daniel had taught her that certain people only recognize value when accompanied by titles and stock options. These men wouldn't understand the satisfaction she found in helping Daniel manage their foundation's $450 million endowment, directing resources to causes that genuinely improved lives. As flight attendants began the first-class meal service, Jessica approached with a warm smile. "Would you prefer the grilled salmon or the beef tenderloin, ma'am?" "The salmon, please," Emma replied. "And for you, sir," Jessica turned to Richard, "tenderloin medium rare. And I'll have a whiskey deet. You do stock Macallan 25, don't you? I won't settle for inferior spirits." His tone had transformed, imperious and demanding. As Jessica moved away, Richard leaned toward Bradley across the aisle. "That's how you handle the staff. They need to understand who's important." Bradley nodded in agreement. "First class is a statement. If you can't afford the lifestyle that comes with it, you belong in economy with the rest." Emma took a sip of water, her eyes still on her book. She'd encountered countless Richard Blackwoods over the years, men who measured their worth by how effectively they could dominate a room, a conversation, a flight attendant. "Excuse me," a woman's voice interrupted. It was the passenger seated behind Richard, a sharply dressed executive in her late 50s. "Some of us are trying to work. Could you please keep it down?" Richard turned, ready to deliver a cutting response, then stopped short when he recognized her. "Eleanor Richards from Atlantic Trust, is that you?" "Yes," she replied coolly. "Richard Blackwood. We met at the Gladstone conference last spring." He extended his hand, all smiles, now that he recognized her, standing in the financial world. "I remember," Eleanor said, not sounding particularly impressed. Her eyes drifted to Emma, taking in the hoodie and casual appearance with evident curiosity. "Forgive me, but aren't you?" Emma gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Eleanor caught it, her eyes widening slightly before a knowing smile appeared. "Never mind." She finished settling back in her seat. Richard glanced between them, suspicion evident in his expression. "You two know each other?" "Not exactly," Emma replied, returning to her book. The meal service continued. Richard made a show of sending his steak back, claiming it was overcooked, while loudly explaining to Bradley how a proper tenderloin should be prepared. "So tell me, Emma," Richard said, cutting into his second steak, "how does someone in charity work afford first-class wealthy parents, generous husband, or did you just get lucky with an upgrade?" Before she could answer, the plane shuddered slightly, hitting a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and the captain announced they were experiencing light turbulence. Emma set her book aside, suddenly gripping the armrest. This was the part of flying she dreaded, the stark reminder that they were suspended 30,000 feet above solid ground. "Afraid of flying?" Richard asked, noticing her whitened knuckles. "A little," she admitted. "Shouldn't have splurged on first class then," he remarked. "Economy would have been equally turbulent, but considerably cheaper." Behind them, Eleanor Richards cleared her throat loudly, clearly disapproving. Emma just breathed deeply, practicing the techniques her therapist had taught her for managing flight anxiety. The plane settled and Jessica approached. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" she asked Emma, genuine concern in her eyes. "Just some tea, please, chamomile if you have it." Jessica moved efficiently, returning moments later with a steaming cup. "Thank you, Jessica," Emma said gratefully. Richard's eyebrows rose. "On a first-name basis with the flight attendants, you must fly this route frequently." Emma simply nodded, sipping her tea. The conversation around her continued, but her mind drifted to Daniel. He would be waiting at Reagan National despite her insistence that she could take a car service. The CEO of Pacific Voyager can't have his wife taking ride shares. He joked. It's bad for the brand. Richard had struck up a conversation with Bradley and another executive who had joined them from across the aisle, a younger man named Kevin, who seemed desperate to make connections. The Sullivan acquisition of Pacific Voyager was masterful, Kevin was saying, his voice carrying clearly to Emma. Taking a failing regional carrier and transforming it into a luxury aviation leader in just 6 years. "Daniel Sullivan is overrated," Richard replied dismissively. "He got lucky with timing and market conditions. Anyone with his family connections and capital could have achieved the same." Emma's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her book Daniel had rebuilt. Pacific Voyager from near bankruptcy to industry leader through relentless determination and innovation. His inheritance had been modest, just enough for a controlling stake. The rest was grueling, 20-hour days, brilliant strategy, and a genuine desire to transform the flying experience. I disagree, Bradley countered. I heard he personally responds to customer emails every evening. What CEO at his level does that? PR stunt? Richard scoffed. Probably has some intern handling it all. Emma suppressed a smile, thinking of the 3 hours Daniel spent each night reviewing customer feedback. Kevin lowered his voice, though not enough. What I wouldn't give to meet his wife. Though Emma Sullivan. Have you seen her former designer runs their foundation now? Worth billions. Married the golden ticket. Actually, Bradley corrected. She had her own success. Fashion brand that she built from scratch and sold for millions before they met. Emma kept her eyes fixed on her book, though she'd stopped reading. Her small clothing line, launched right after design school, had been reasonably successful, but hardly worth millions. She'd sold it to focus on the foundation, a decision she'd never regretted. Still, Richard insisted, you don't reach that level without connections. Merit only takes you so far in this world. The conversation shifted as Jessica approached with fresh drinks for the men. Emma couldn't help but notice how Richard's tone changed, becoming overfamiliar, almost condescending. Tell me, sweetheart, he said to Jessica, how long have you been with Pacific Voyager? Ever meet the big boss, Daniel Sullivan himself? Jessica maintained her professional demeanor. 7 years, sir, and company policy prevents us from discussing executives. His wife's probably a piece of work too, Kevin added. Those trophy wives always are. Probably throws a fit if her champagne isn't perfectly chilled. Emma set her book down gently. Excuse me, she said, rising from her seat. I need to use the restroom. As she moved past Richard, he made no effort to stand or create space, forcing her to awkwardly squeeze past his knees. In the small bathroom, Emma splashed cold water on her face. Normally, their ignorant comments wouldn't affect her. She'd heard far worse over the years. But today, after a week of missing Daniel, dealing with her brother's health concerns, and the stress of flying, her patience was wearing thin. When she returned to her seat, Richard and his newfound friends were comparing watches. Richard's Vacheron, Bradley's Rolex, and Kevin's Breitling, each trying to outdo the others. That's what separates us from them, Richard was saying, gesturing vaguely toward the economy section. Understanding the value of quality of prestige. First class isn't just a wider seat, it's a mindset. His eyes fell on Emma as she retook her seat. Don't you agree, Emma? Though I suppose in your line of work, luxury isn't exactly a priority. I believe authenticity is more important than appearances, she replied evenly. Says someone in a dolphin hoodie, Kevin snickered. Richard leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. A word of advice, if you want to be taken seriously in first-class dress the part, this isn't public transportation. Eleanor Richards suddenly spoke up. Perhaps she doesn't need expensive clothing to validate her worth, gentlemen. Richard turned, his expression cooling. Just making conversation. Eleanor. No, Eleanor replied. You're being condescending to someone you know nothing about. Emma shot Eleanor a grateful look. The older woman nodded slightly, then returned to her work. The captain announced they were beginning their descent into Washington with a slight delay. Emma texted Daniel about the delay, and his response came quickly. Nothing more important than picking up my favorite person. See you soon, love. The simple message brought a smile to her face, reminding her why none of this mattered. Not Richard's judgments, not the snickers, not the assumptions. They need to fix these delays, Richard complained, checking his watch repeatedly. Time is money and Sullivan is wasting both. I'm sure Daniel Sullivan isn't personally responsible for Reagan's air traffic, Emma remarked, unable to stop herself. Richard raised an eyebrow. First name basis with the CEO. What are you, some kind of super fan? Bradley and Kevin chuckled, clearly enjoying Emma's apparent discomfort. I've met him. Emma said, simply returning to her book. Right, Richard snorted. And I've had lunch with the president. Eleanor Richards leaned forward again. Gentlemen, your conversation is not only unprofessional, but embarrassingly uninformed. Richard twisted in his seat, irritation crossing his features. What's your problem? Eleanor, defending the help. The help, Eleanor repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Is that how you view everyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of success? Before Richard could respond, Jessica approached with a folded piece of paper. Mr. Blackwood, there's a message for you from the ground staff. He opened it, scanned the contents, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching reverence. Daniel Sullivan wants to meet me at the terminal, he said, his voice rising with excitement. Me specifically. Emma's eyes widened slightly. Daniel hadn't mentioned meeting any passengers. Yes, sir, Jessica confirmed. He's requested meetings with several passengers upon arrival. Richard turned to Bradley and Kevin, his earlier arrogance magnified tenfold. Gentlemen, this is how it happens. The right connections, the right impression. He must have heard my name, recognized my reputation. Emma bit her lip to prevent herself from laughing outright. The men's excitement was almost childlike, primping and adjusting their ties at the prospect of meeting her husband. The plane landed smoothly, and as the seatbelt sign turned off, the cabin erupted into activity. Richard and his new friends were particularly eager, gathering their belongings with unusual haste. Don't want to keep Sullivan waiting, Richard explained, straightening his tie. First impressions matter. Of course, Emma replied, taking her time. She knew Daniel would wait. The plane docked at the gate and first-class passengers began to disembark. Emma held back, letting Richard and the others rush ahead. As she stepped into the jet bridge, Jessica pulled her aside gently. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband is waiting in the VIP lounge. He asked me to escort you. Thank you, Jessica, but I think I'll go the regular way today. Emma smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. I believe a certain group of gentlemen are about to learn an important lesson. Emma walked slowly through the terminal, deliberately staying within eyesight of Richard and his group. They had gathered near the exit gate, straightening their suits and checking their appearances. Then she saw him. Daniel Sullivan, her husband of 17 years, standing tall in a simple charcoal suit, his dark hair with distinctive silver temples, slightly tousled. At 47, he still had the same effect on her as the day they met. He was scanning the crowd, looking for her. Their eyes met, and his face lit up with a smile that never failed to warm her heart. As she walked toward him, she noticed Richard and the others watching clearly, wondering who this newcomer was and whether this was the Daniel Sullivan they were expecting. Emma reached Daniel, stepping into his warm embrace, feeling the familiar comfort of his arms around her. Hello, love, he murmured into her hair. How was your flight? Educational, she replied, turning slightly so she could see Richard's face. The realization was dawning on him, his expression morphing from confusion to shock as he connected the dots. The woman in the dolphin hoodie, the quiet confidence, the first name reference to Daniel Sullivan. Daniel kept his arm around Emma's waist as he looked over at the gaping executives. Gentlemen, he said pleasantly, I understand you've had the pleasure of my wife's company during your flight. Richard Blackwood's face had drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Your wife, Richard finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, Emma Sullivan. Daniel confirmed his tone, pleasant but his eyes hard as steel. I believe you have been sharing her company during your flight. Mrs. Sullivan, Kevin stammered. We had no idea. Your hoodie, I mean. My favorite, Emma interjected calmly, a gift from my husband. She gently touched the row of embroidered dolphins. Authenticity over pretense every time. Eleanor Richards approached, extending her hand to Daniel. Eleanor Richards, Frost Capital. Your wife handled herself with remarkable grace today, Daniel. I always am, Daniel replied, shaking her hand warmly. Richard thrust his hand forward. Richard Blackwood, sir. Blackwood Capital Partners. It's an honor to meet you. Your wife and I were just having a fascinating discussion about first-class travel. Daniel's eyebrow rose slightly. Were you? Emma texted me some highlights. He didn't accept the handshake, instead checking his watch. If you'll excuse us, I've arranged a private car for my wife. As they turned to leave, Emma paused and looked back. Mr. Blackwood, she called softly. Richard's head snapped up, hope flashing briefly across his features. Your watch is beautiful, but it's running 4 minutes slow. She tapped her own wrist, where a simple silver timepiece gleamed. You might want to get that adjusted. Without waiting for a response, she and Daniel continued toward the exit, leaving behind 3 stunned executives and 1 quietly amused Eleanor Richards. As they settled into their private car, Daniel revealed that Blackwood Capital's partnership proposal had been declined. His people skills might not be the right fit for our company culture. He explained with a mischievous glint in his eye. Emma considered this, then shook her head. Don't reject him because of may judge his proposal on its merits. Daniel smiled, leaning over to kiss her forehead. That's why you're the heart of our foundation. Always fair even to those who don't deserve it. Back at the airport, Richard received a text from his assistant. Pacific Voyager declined our partnership proposal. Sullivan himself reviewed and rejected it. Richard closed his eyes, the full impact of his misjudgment washing over him. He had spent 90 minutes belittling the wife of a man whose approval he desperately needed, all because of a dolphin hoodie and his own prejudice. In the distance, he spotted Emma's flight attendant, Jessica, walking through the terminal. She caught his eye for just a moment, gave him a small, knowing smile, and continued on her way. Another reminder that in life as in first class, it was never about the clothes you wore or the watch you flaunted, but the respect you showed to everyone around you. Have you ever judged someone too quickly based on their appearance? Next time you're tempted to mock someone who doesn't fit your idea of success, remember this story. The simple woman in casual clothes might just be the most powerful person in the room. She might even own the airline. True worth isn't found in designer labels or first-class tickets, but in how we treat others regardless of their apparent status. Don't forget to subscribe to Sir Alex Stories for more tales of unexpected twists and valuable life lessons.